Nay! Nay! Nay!
The letter was not addressed to him, and yet there it lay, open, unfolded, its creased edges curling like the fingers of a dead man, upon the very desk that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. The black ink bled across the ivory parchment in a hand he recognized at once, a hand so achingly familiar that his chest constricted, as though a fist had closed around his very heart and refused to release it. It was her handwriting, and every word within it was a lie he had never been meant to discover. But before we go any further into this tale of betrayal, sacrifice, and scandalous deceit, if you are new to this channel, welcome to the Duke's Lost Letters, where every story will ruin you in the most exquisite way imaginable. Please do take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what breathes life to these stories, and it means more than you could possibly know. Now, let us return where hearts are broken and the truth is far more dangerous than any duel. His name was Edmund Ashford, the 9th Duke of Wyndmere, a man of considerable fortune, formidable countenance, and, if one were to consult the whispered opinions of every drawing-room from Bath to Mayfair, the most devastatingly handsome bachelor in all of England. He was not, by nature, a sentimental man. He had been reared on discipline and duty, schooled in restraint, and had long ago concluded that love was a luxury ill-suited to a man of his station. Then he had met Eliza Vane. She was not a great heiress, she was not titled, she was the second daughter of a country vicar, possessed of nothing more than dark, laughing eyes, an uncommonly sharp wit, and a laugh that had, on 3 distinct occasions, caused Edmund Ashford to forget the entirety of the English language. He had fallen, helplessly, catastrophically, and completely, in love with her. The ton had not approved, naturally. His aunt, Lady Pemberton, a woman whose disdain could strip the gilt from a picture frame, had declared the match entirely beneath the dignity of the Ashford name. His solicitor had delivered a grim-faced accounting of the social consequences. His mother had wept with the theatrical dedication of a woman who had rehearsed the scene in her private chambers. Edmund had not cared, not even remotely. He had stood in the very library where he now trembled, and he had made his declaration with absolute conviction. He would renounce the dukedom if the title became a barrier between himself and Eliza. He would walk away from Wyndmere Park, from the earldoms and the estates and the centuries of ancestral weight, all of it, if only she would say yes. She had said yes. The betrothal had been announced on a Thursday. By Friday, Edmund had begun the legal proceedings. By Saturday, the scandal had consumed London whole. And now it was Sunday morning, 3 weeks hence, and he held in his hand a letter that unravelled every single thread of it. He read it twice, then a third time, his breath coming harder with each pass, the paper trembling between fingers that had gone quite cold. "It is as we planned," the letter began. "He has agreed to renounce the title. The moment the deed is finalized, the estate reverts under the terms of the entail, and you shall have what we have sought these 3 years. Do not lose your nerve now, Eliza. The man is besotted. He will never suspect a thing. Play your part until it is done, and then you are free of him, and I shall have Wyndmere." It was signed simply with the initial R. Edmund set the letter down. He was not a man given to visible displays of anguish. He had stood at his father's bedside without weeping. He had weathered the loss of his closest friend at Waterloo with the rigid composure of a soldier. But now, alone in the flickering candlelight of his ancestral library, the cold November draught threading through the curtains, the fire guttering low in the grate, he pressed both hands flat upon the desk and simply breathed. She had not loved him. She had used him. The realization did not arrive all at once. It came in slow, terrible waves, like the tide advancing over a shore it intends to consume entirely. The memory of her laughter, that laugh he had treasured like a private fortune, now sounded differently in his mind, rehearsed, constructed, a performance calibrated to the precise weakness of his heart. He had been, in the simplest and most humiliating of terms, an absolute fool. The door to the library opened behind him. He did not turn.
Edmund. Her voice was soft, warm, achingly, infuriatingly warm. The rustle of her silk morning gown preceded her across the floor. "You were not at breakfast. I grew worried." The fire crackled. A candle sputtered. Outside, the first grey light of morning pressed against the frost-laced window panes. "Did you?" he said quietly. There was a pause. The quality of silence in that room shifted, became charged with something unspoken and immense. "Is something the matter?" Eliza asked. He turned then, slowly, and he held up the letter. He watched the color leave her face. It departed with remarkable efficiency, first her cheeks, then her lips, then the very light in those dark eyes he had thought contained the whole of the world. "Edmund," she began. "Do not," he said, and his voice, though quiet, carried the force of a man who has just had the floor vanish beneath his feet and has decided, against all rational expectation, to remain standing. "If this story has already gripped you, and I rather suspect it has, please do pause for one brief moment and subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters if you haven't already. Every like, every subscription tells me to keep these stories coming. Now, back to Edmund, who is about to discover that the truth is far more complicated than even this devastating letter suggests." The silence between them was the kind that leaves marks. Eliza did not deny it. That, perhaps, was the detail that wounded him most deeply, not the confession, but the absence of even an attempt at refusal. She stood before him in her ivory morning gown, her dark hair loose about her shoulders, and she looked at him with an expression he could not, for the life of him, name. It was not guilt, it was not defiance. It was something altogether more complicated and more sorrowful than either. "Who is R?" he asked at last. "Who is it that has been directing your performance so masterfully?" A breath. "My cousin, Robert Vane." "And what is his interest in Wyndmere?" "His mother, my aunt, was the daughter of the second Duke." Her voice was steady, but her hands, he noticed, were clasped so tightly before her that the knuckles had gone white. "She was passed over in the entail. Robert has harbored a claim for years, believing the estate was wrongfully settled. He believed that if you renounced the title willingly and the estate reverted under the old deed, he could press his suit in chancery." He absorbed this. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, watching the bare-limbed trees of the park sway in the winter wind. "And you," he said, "what did you stand to gain?" The pause this time was not the pause of someone manufacturing an answer. It was the pause of someone steeling themselves to give the only honest one they have. "Freedom," she said quietly. "Robert promised me an independence, a cottage, an annuity. He told me that if I succeeded, I would never again be beholden to any man, never again be the vicar's daughter with nothing to recommend her but a tolerably clever tongue." She stopped. When she resumed, her voice was lower. "I was desperate, Edmund, and desperation does not excuse. I know it does not excuse, but it does explain." He turned. Whatever he had expected to see, cold calculation, or perhaps tearful manipulation, he had not expected what he found.
She was not weeping, she was not imploring, she simply stood and looked at him with those dark eyes, offering nothing further in her own defense, as though she had already convicted herself and was merely awaiting his sentence. "Did any of it," he said at last, each word deliberate and measured, "did any of it mean anything, any of it at all?" The silence stretched between them like the frozen surface of a lake, thin, treacherous, and liable to shatter at the slightest pressure. "Every word," she whispered, "every single word, every moment that was not in that letter. Edmund, I tried to stop. She pressed her lips together. "I tried to tell Robert I would not continue. He threatened to expose my involvement in terms that would have destroyed my family entirely, my father, my sisters. I was trapped in a scheme I could no longer navigate and had never been willing to fully commit to in the first place." Edmund stood very still. A coal shifted in the fireplace behind him, sending a brief shower of sparks skittering upward. The draught from the window lifted the curtain edge and let in a slice of cold grey morning. He thought of the way she had argued with him over Voltaire, the way she had made him laugh at his own pomposity when he had been at his most insufferable, the way she had, on a rainy afternoon in September, placed her hand over his without preamble and looked at him as though he were something worth looking at. He was a methodical man, a rational one. He told himself that none of it was real. He did not entirely believe himself. It was his man of business who provided the final piece of the tableau, arriving at Wyndmere Park that very afternoon with a leather satchel and the uncomfortable expression of a man bearing news he would prefer someone else deliver. The entail, as it transpired, was not what Robert Vane had represented it to be. His solicitor laid out the documents with the careful precision of a surgeon. The terms of the original settlement were unambiguous. Voluntary renunciation by the current Duke did not, under any circumstances, cause the estate to revert. The title and its holdings were bound absolutely. Robert Vane's reading of the entail, or rather his deliberate misreading of it, had been the architecture of the entire scheme. He had not merely manipulated Eliza, he had deceived her. There was no cottage, there was no annuity, there was no freedom waiting at the end of her performance. Robert Vane had used his cousin as a tool in a strategy built entirely upon a legal fiction, promising her a reward that he had known from the very beginning he could never deliver. Edmund found her in the garden. She was standing very still beside the stone balustrade, her cloak pulled close against the cold, staring out across the frost-white park with the expression of someone who has just been informed that the ground beneath their feet is not, as they supposed, solid. "He lied to you as well," Edmund said without preamble. She turned. Something moved across her face, grief, or perhaps the peculiar kind of exhaustion that settles in after a long pretense has finally been relinquished. "I see. The entail was never at risk. Your involvement served no one's purpose but his vanity." He paused. "You were not a conspirator, Eliza. You were a pawn, and you were frightened." Another pause, longer. "I understand, frightened." The winter wind moved between them. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the way she had always looked at him, as though she were attempting to read something written in very small letters at a considerable distance. "Edmund," she began, "I cannot ask." "No," he agreed, "you cannot, not yet." He held her gaze. "But neither am I willing to walk away from everything I know to be true about you, on the basis of a scheme you attempted to abandon, and a man who had not the decency to tell you the truth even when he was using you as an instrument." We have reached the end of today's story on the Duke's lost letters, and what a story it has been. If you felt every moment of Edmund's anguish, every tremor of Eliza's guilt and impossible courage, then this channel was made precisely for you. Please, if you have not already, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single tale. Leave a comment below. Do you believe Edmund should forgive her? Your answers always inspire the next story. Robert Vane was quietly ruined. His misrepresentation of the entail was placed before the appropriate legal authorities, and he departed England to the continent with considerably less dignity than he had arrived. The renunciation proceedings, which had not yet been finalized, were quietly withdrawn. And Eliza Vane, the vicar's daughter with the laughing eyes and the tongue that could strip the pretension from a duke without even pausing for breath, remained at Wyndmere Park through the winter. Not as a prisoner of scandal, not as the disgraced instrument of a failed scheme, but simply as herself, as the woman who had been desperate and frightened, and, in the midst of all of it, had somehow still managed to love him truthfully, in every moment that had not been written in another man's hand. The letter, for its part, was burned in the library fireplace on a cold Tuesday morning, its creased edges curling at last into ash and heat and silence. Edmund watched it burn, and then he went to find her.